I found the letter tucked under a rock on my porch, not in the mailbox, not handed to me, but shoved under a chunk of limestone like a ransom note. Notice of violation, it read in bold, joyless font. I skimmed through the legalese until I reached the reason, unapproved structure within HOA jurisdiction. My stomach twisted. Unapproved. The structure in question was my family's farmhouse, standing on this land for over 100 years, long before the Homeowners Association even existed. The farmhouse was my home, my land, my family's history. And someone thought they could take it from me. The name at the bottom of the letter made my teeth clench. Karen Meadows, HOA President. I looked up and saw her, standing on the sidewalk in her pressed khakis and floral blouse, clipboard tucked under one arm, watching me like a lioness studying a wounded gazelle. I forced a breath through my nose and stepped off the porch. "Karen," I said evenly. She beamed. "Oh, good. You got my notice. I was worried it would blow away before you had a chance to read it." "Yeah, about that." I held up the paper. "You do realize my farm is private property?" Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, I understand, Ethan." She dragged out my name like a kindergarten teacher scolding a wayward child. "But you see, there's been a clerical oversight. According to our revised HOA map, your land is included in the community zone. That means you're subject to our policies." I scoffed. "Your map is wrong. This farm isn't in the HOA." She tilted her head in faux concern. Well, that's not what our records show. And since you never formally applied for an exception, we have to treat your property accordingly. Your farmhouse doesn't meet aesthetic standards. Peeling paint, outdated siding, farm equipment left out in the open. She made a little tsk-tsk sound. "It's an eyesore, Ethan. We're trying to build a community." I clenched my jaw. "This community was built on this farm." She sighed dramatically, as if I were exhausting her. "Look, I'm reasonable. I don't want to fine you right away. That's why I sent the notice first, to give you a chance to make the right decision. If you agree to bring the property up to HOA standards, I'll be willing to work with you. And if I don't?" The smile dropped. "Then we'll be forced to take further action." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You really think you can just take my land?" "Oh, Ethan," she said, shaking her head with syrupy condescension. "It's not your land anymore. It belongs to the community." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there with my fists clenched. The battle had begun. 2 days later, the fines started rolling in. Karen wasn't subtle. I woke up to find a bright orange notice of fine taped to my barn. $500 for non-compliance with HOA appearance standards. By noon, another one was stuck to my truck. $750 for unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. By sundown, there was a third, this time nailed to my fence. $1,250 for failure to remove unapproved structures. The farmhouse. Karen was escalating. I stormed into the county records office the next morning. "I need property documents for my farm," I told the clerk. She typed in my address, then frowned. "That's odd," she murmured. I leaned in. "What?" She spun the monitor toward me. "According to the system, your property was transferred to HOA management 3 months ago." My pulse pounded in my ears. "That's impossible. I own this land." "Do you have proof of ownership?" I inhaled sharply. "Yes, and I'm going to get it." By the time I got back home, my fence had been spray-painted with a bright red X. I barely had time to process it before Karen pulled up in her pristine SUV, stepping out with the smugness of a queen surveying her kingdom. "Oh, don't mind that," she said, gesturing to the vandalism. "It's just a marker for the community garden we're putting in. We've already scheduled excavation." Excavation. I took a slow step forward, my hands balling into fists. "You're planning to bulldoze my home?" She clasped her hands together, feigning innocence. "Well, once the legal transfer is finalized, it won't be your home anymore. Just think of the opportunity, a beautiful green space, open to everyone. Instead of an old farmhouse, we'll have something new and useful." I exhaled through my nose, my body buzzing with rage. "This isn't over, Karen." She smiled like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, I know. That's what makes it fun." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, staring at the red X on my land. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to bury her. But Karen Meadows wasn't going to make it easy. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling in the distance. I shot out of bed, heart hammering, and yanked the curtain open. A construction crew had parked at the end of my driveway. An excavator sat on a flatbed trailer, its rust-orange arm hanging like a poised vulture. I grabbed my boots and stormed outside. Karen was already there, standing next to a clipboard-wielding man in a neon vest. She was smiling. "Morning, Ethan," she called, her tone dripping with artificial cheer. I clenched my jaw. "What the hell is this?" "Oh, this?" She gestured to the excavator. "Just some preliminary work. We need to survey the land before we break ground on the community garden." I stepped between her and my fence. "You don't have my land," she tisked, shaking her head. Ethan, I warned you. Your farmhouse doesn't meet community standards, and you refused to comply. Now it's time to make way for something better." I turned to the construction foreman. "This property is privately owned. You start digging, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He hesitated. Karen's smile flickered. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're a lawyer, Ethan. You know this is legal. The county records confirm the land transfer. It's out of your hands. Not if I could help it." I folded my arms. "You'd better have the deed on you." Karen's lips tightened, just for a second. Then she flashed another condescending smile. "Oh, it's already been processed. You're welcome to check at the county office." I already had, and I knew damn well something was off. Karen wasn't just bending the rules, she was breaking them. I turned back to the foreman. "I want to see the permit." He shifted uncomfortably. She said the HOA already cleared everything." "That's not what I asked," I cut in. "If you don't have a county permit, you can't break ground. That's state law." The foreman glanced at Karen. She was still smiling, but I saw it. The crack, the slight tension in her jaw, the flicker of annoyance behind her eyes. I stepped closer. "I'll be in touch with the zoning board. If a single shovel touches my land, you'll be facing a lawsuit so big you'll be paying legal fees until retirement." The foreman swore under his breath. Then, reluctantly, he signaled his crew to pack up. Karen's expression didn't change, but I knew I'd rattled her. She thought she was untouchable. Now she wasn't so sure. The fines doubled the next day. Another bright orange notice on my barn, $3,000 for unauthorized land use. A second taped to my porch, $4,500 for obstruction of HOA improvements. Then came the letters. Final warnings. Threats of legal action. Karen wasn't backing down, but I wasn't either. I spent the next week digging through records, combing through zoning laws, and making some very interesting discoveries. The HOA's land grab wasn't just shady, it was fraudulent. The transfer on my property had been filed under a fake signature, my own name, forged. And it wasn't just me. 3 other homeowners had suddenly found their backyards reallocated for HOA projects, each one with suspiciously altered records. Karen had gone too far. I had enough to take her down, but I needed one final push, so I let her think she was winning. By the end of the week, Karen showed up at my farm again, this time with police escort. A deputy stepped out first, adjusting his belt. "Mr. Carter," he said, nodding, "got a call about a property dispute." Karen stepped forward, smiling, like a cat who'd swallowed a canary. "It's so unfortunate, officer, but Ethan has refused to comply with the legal land transfer. The HOA is forced to take action." I played my part, crossed my arms, scowled. "This is my property." Karen sighed dramatically. "I know it's hard for you, but you have to accept reality. The bulldozers will be here Monday. I wanted to give you a chance to remove your belongings." She turned to the officer. "Frankly, I worry he might interfere with the process. The pool." Deputy frowned. "Are you suggesting criminal obstruction?" Karen's eyes gleamed. "It could come to that." I let the silence stretch before I spoke. Then I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a neatly folded official document. "Actually, officer," I said calmly, "this might change things." I handed it to him. He unfolded it, scanning the page. His brows furrowed. Then his jaw tightened. Karen's smile faltered. "What? What is that?" The deputy exhaled sharply and turned to her. "Mrs. Meadows, did you personally authorize these land transfers?" Her fingers twitched around her clipboard. "Of course. The HOA—" "Because," the deputy interrupted, "this document is from the county assessor's office. It proves the land transfers were illegally altered. The signature on Ethan Carter's file, forged." Karen's face went pale. My lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. "Now," the deputy continued, "I'll need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." The silence stretched. Karen's mouth opened, then shut. She flicked her eyes toward me, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. I don't think you understand," she stammered. "The HOA owns this land. This is a mistake." The deputy didn't blink. "Then I'm sure you won't mind coming down to clear it up." Karen turned back to me, her face twisted with rage. "You think this proves anything?" she hissed. "You're making a huge mistake." I just smiled, because she didn't know the half of it yet. "You think this proves anything?" Karen hissed. "You're making a huge mistake." I just smiled, because she didn't know the half of it yet. The deputy held out a hand. "Mrs. Meadows, I need you to come with me." Karen recoiled like he'd slapped her. "This is absurd," she sputtered. "I am the HOA. I make the rules. Here! You're the president of an HOA, not a government official," the deputy said flatly. "And from where I'm standing, this looks an awful lot like fraud." That was when the crowd started to form. Neighbors had begun trickling onto their porches, stepping out onto their lawns. Whispers spread. "What's going on? Is that Karen? She looks pissed." Karen felt the shift too. She glanced around, chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. The iron grip she had on this community was slipping, and she was desperate to hold on. She turned back to me, her expression dark and livid. "You set this up," she spat. I met her gaze, steady and calm. "I just let the truth catch up to you." Her eyes flicked to the document still clutched in the deputy's hand. I could see the moment it hit her, how much worse this was going to get. And I hadn't even started. Karen didn't go quietly. At the police station she ranted about corrupt officials and baseless accusations, but the evidence against her was airtight. It turned out my land wasn't the only one she'd tried to steal. 3 other property owners had received the same fraudulent notices, conveniently the ones with larger backyards or undeveloped lots. Then there was the money. Karen had been collecting HOA dues, but some of those payments never made it to the association's official records. A forensic audit revealed tens of thousands of dollars missing. By the time the case hit court, Karen wasn't just facing a property dispute. She was up against fraud, forgery, and embezzlement charges. The best part? She had no idea who had set the final trap. The courtroom was packed the day Karen's trial began. Neighbors filled the seats, some of them people who had once cowered under her reign, the ones who had been too scared to challenge her, who had swallowed every absurd fine, every arbitrary rule, because they thought they had to. But now they were here to watch her fall. Karen sat at the defense table, her once polished composure cracked and fraying. Her hair wasn't as neatly curled. Her blazer looked stiff, ill-fitting. There were dark circles under her eyes. She had spent years making herself untouchable, and now she was just another defendant. I took my seat across the room, arms crossed, as the judge called the session to order. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the defendant, Karen Meadows, knowingly altered property records to seize land under false pretenses. Additionally, financial audits have revealed over $50,000 in misallocated HOA funds." Karen stiffened. "Furthermore," the prosecutor continued, "witness testimony will confirm that Mrs. Meadows used intimidation tactics, unlawful fines, and threats of property destruction to control community residents." I leaned back in my chair, watching as the walls closed in, and then the moment I had been waiting for. "We also have a witness who can confirm that Mrs. Meadows personally authorized the fraudulent documents." Karen's head snapped toward me because I was standing. I stepped up to the stand, cleared my throat, and met the judge's gaze. "My name is Ethan Carter," I said. "I'm the city attorney, and I have evidence that Karen Meadows knowingly engaged in fraud." A ripple of whispers swept through the room. Karen let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a gasp and a furious growl. You lied. I turned my head, meeting her wide, disbelieving eyes. "No," I said, voice steady. "You assumed." She thought I was just some farmer, some poor backwoods fool she could steamroll. She never bothered to find out who I was. That was her mistake, and now she was paying for it. Karen was sentenced to 4 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. The HOA board dissolved within weeks. Without Karen, the remaining members crumbled, most of them eager to distance themselves from her corruption. The fines? Gone. The community garden plan? Scrapped, and the homeowners. They took back their power. People who had once been afraid to step out of line now spoke freely, openly. Neighbors who had barely exchanged words started working together. Real community, not the dictatorship Karen had created. And my farm. It remained exactly where it belonged. I sat on my porch one evening watching the sun dip behind the fields. The air smelled like earth and wood smoke, the quiet hum of cicadas filling the dusk. I took a sip of my beer, letting the peace settle over me. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A news update. Karen Meadows denied early release. Former HOA president continues to claim innocence despite overwhelming evidence. I smirked. Of course she did. Karen had spent her whole life believing she was untouchable, that the rules didn't apply to her. Now, she had nothing. No power, no followers, no control. Just a prison cell and a name that would forever be associated with corruption. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Justice wasn't always swift. But damn, was it satisfying.